This is just the beginning. That's the world that we live in. Let me help you believe in what we can do when we stand united. We are one with the world. We can make a brighter tomorrow. Together make a change. It's our life. We can't step back from what we know is right. So let's shine our light. Oh, let's shine our light. We won't listen to what they're saying. We know it's just love that we're giving to this place that we call our home. We can't change what's been done, but it's still our run. We are one with the world. We can make a brighter tomorrow. Together make a change. It's our life. We can't step back from what we know is right. So let's shine our light.
I am Sanjoy Roy, the co-chair of the Catalyzing Change Week Programming Committee. Welcome to Catalyzing Change Week 2024. This is where we'll not just have conversations, but we'll actually see change. We'll see change makers, innovators within the social space. You'll meet government folks and funders. You'll see people who've done excellent good practice that we can learn from. And most importantly, it'll be a place to network, learn, and exchange ideas. So do dive right in to the Catalyzing Change Week 2024 and enjoy the experience. I am Sanjoy Roy, the
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be joining you here for this Catalyst 2030 session. My name is Solveig Sofanesdottir, and I work for EIT Climate-KIC. We are hosting this session on how to influence climate policy, innovation, and thought leadership through capability and capacity building. And I am joined here by Julie Chrysler, leading circular economy and social impact at Yunus Environment Hub. And Matteo Grassi, who is a Science, Technology and Innovation Senior Specialist at IDB, and Kirsten Dunlop, CEO of EIT Climate-KIC. We are looking forward to hearing small inputs from all of our speakers on how might we and how can we all learn from examples of how policy innovation, how various societal challenges and specific goals can be achieved through policy innovation, how thought leadership interacts with that, and why it's so important to improve policy through innovative approaches, why it's important for us to build the capability and the capacity for us all collectively to work together, collaborate together in different ways. What are the training, development, what focus do we need to bring to the conversation about capability and capacity building? And this is a topic that is very close to our heart at EIT Climate-KIC. So I'm very happy to be here today. Just quickly, if there is any questions, anything that comes through in or questions that come to your mind as you hear our guests speak during their small speaking points, then feel free to pop those in the chat. So I will keep an eye on that as we move then through presentations and into our conversation, which I hope that I will get some input from you for as well. as we have short time, I would like to just dive straight into the conversation and offer Julie Chrysler the floor as the first sort of insight and inspiration point for the conversation. And Julie is going to be giving us some insights from the Circular Business Strategies by UNUS Environment Hub. Julie, are you happy to?
I'm happy.
To take...
Thanks so much. And thank you so much for the invitation to be here today. And I apologize if my voice is a bit off. Fighting a cold, but we'll try and make it through. So quickly, just to give you some background information before I go into a case study with a real example, circular business strategies and innovations are obviously essential for climate action, but oftentimes we see that critical social dimensions to achieve sustainability goals are not considered or implemented. And so to do so, we need to build just transition into the development of circular strategies so that not only environmental, but also social elements are embedded for holistic impact. And so capacity building is obviously a core area to do that, because a lot of trainings offer how do I build a circular model, but how do we also ensure that that's benefiting the people behind it. So just quickly, I wanted to give the definition of just transition as defined by the International Labour Organization, which is kind of the model that we use at least at UNUS Environment Hub, so people know what I'm referring to when I speak to just transition. And basically, a just transition means greening the economy in a way that is fair and inclusive as possible to everyone concerned, creating decent work opportunities and leaving no one behind. So what that means is, as we're building these new models to design out waste, we have to understand the impact on the workforce. And are we creating the capacity building, upskilling and reskilling that we need to move from these linear models to more circular models? So I wanted to give an example from one of our accelerator programs, our Circularize Accelerator, which we launched in Kenya from a really amazing organization called PadMad. And PadMad is a social business that has embedded just transition into their business model, their circular business model, to move from linear to circular and to become more resilient. So PadMad is fighting period poverty through their use of reusable and affordable sanitary pads. And excuse me, they're actually aiming to solve 4 main problems with their pads. So the first is education. So 4.9 days per month are missed by 1 million girls in school in Kenya because of their period, because they're not able to go when they're menstruating. Economics, so number 2, 65% of menstruators in Kenya can't afford sanitary pads. Number 3 is the environment. The disposable pads take 500 to 800 years to decompose. And number 4 is employment. They're creating decent jobs for the communities. So PadMed went through our accelerator capacity building training program, and we helped them to scale up their business model with this inclusive mentality in mind. So just to give you a bit of background information about their business. So they're using offcuts of textile waste and turning that waste into value by converting them into these reusable sanitary pads. So that's allowing cheaper access to pads to girls in Kenya to go to school, continue their education, and it's also diverting waste from landfills. And so they implement just transition principles in the production of these pads to ensure that vulnerable groups are incorporated in their value chain. So they work with groups of women through training programs and offer steady, decent employment to help improve their livelihoods. So these groups of women include pregnant moms that are living in the slums, like in Kibera, women with HIV and AIDS, and they're doing a really great project with incarcerated women who normally wouldn't be able to work when they come out of the prisons. So they've actually set up, and they're a stakeholder in a clothing and textile and bakery shop at Laganta Women's Maximum Security Prison. I think this is a very interesting case because we don't hear a lot about kind of the prisons, where they're helping to produce the sanitary pads. And it's a one-of-a-kind project in Kenya that might be rolled out to other prisons in the country that gives dignity and empowerment to women offenders while they're doing their time. So as a result of their work at PadMad, they've created nearly 30 jobs, avoided 45 million disposable pads into the landfills, and over 35,000 women and girls have been positively impacted. So I just wanted to give that as an example of the circular economy plus just transition. And I know I only have 5 minutes, so I'm going to stop there and I'll take any questions if there are any in the chat.
I think if it's okay with you, Julie, we'll pause it there because we are interested in hearing from the three of you from different perspectives, and then bringing it all together in terms of multiple levels of capacity and capability building that are needed for everything to flow through. So with that, I would want to invite Matteo Grassi to the stage. You are giving us an insight and a perspective in understanding international and national policy innovation at IDB. So feel free to come in here.
Thank you, Solveig, and thank you so much for the invitation to participate in this insightful conversation. So we are talking about policy innovation in this panel, and I will start talking about innovation policy. That is not exactly the same, but it is the area where I've been working for some years now, and where the group of people at the IDB, which I belong to, is working. So innovation policy is really a complicated task in the already complicated realm of policy making. And in developing countries, this is even more complicated. So in these 5 minutes, I just wanted to give you some elements and then add what is like the climate part. So first, to be effective, innovation policy requires really a combination of different policies targeting different actors in the science, technology, innovation system of a country, of a region, or of a city. This needs a high level of coordination, public-public, but also public-private. And this is very complicated in countries where these institutional mechanisms of coordination are not set in place, are not stable, and where in general there is a big lack of trust. So trust, I think, is an important concept to discuss today. And actually also in the previous intervention, I think it is key. The second point is that innovation policy requires time to be effective. So this is like not a government policy. It is more, or should be more, of a state policy. It needs a long-term and needs continuity across different policy cycles to be effective. It suffers of what the economist calls dynamic inconsistency. And in Latin America and the Caribbean in general, there is when there is a change of government, there is a tendency of canceling everything done before and start again. That everything was bad and we will start again. Third, innovation policy is a sophisticated area of policy making, and it needs a very specialized capacities. So often the success of a program depends on really the fine-tuning of the instrument. But if there is high turnover, as it happens in a lot of developing countries, it is very complicated to build this capacity in the public servants that also happens to have a market in the private sector. So it is very complicated to build the needed capacities. So if we consider also climate, so we think about climate innovation policy, we are adding a second derivative of complexity to the already complex area of work. Because the language of innovation policy is different from the language of climate policy, and sometimes the targets are different. There is the target of economic development, but there is also a target of decarbonization and adaptation, and also in general of environmental concern. So the coordination is even more complicated. So knowledge sharing and building capacity is even more key in this sector. So what can we do? We have, I have given a lot of problems, but I wanted also to provide an example of a nice solution. So one possible way is to create learning and knowledge communities, and both at national and international level. At IDB, we promoted the creation of the Latin American Network of Innovation Agencies, where 14 agencies at national and regional level come together to discuss and to share good practices and good solutions and acquire knowledge from inside the region and outside the region. And within the RELAI, that is the Spanish acronym for the Innovation Agents Network, we have last year developed together with the friends and colleagues of Climate-KIC a very nice initiative about a circular economy. So circular economy is usually at least in Latin American countries, thought about just recycling, but there is still not a full understanding of how science, technology, innovation really plays a key role in promoting the transition to circular business. So what did we do? We really organized an intensive workshop, 3 months, about how to promote the transition to circular through science, technology, innovation policy, aimed at directors and policymakers and practitioners of the 14 agencies of our networks. And really, through the dialogue, through the sharing of good practices, being exposed to experiences of Europe or of North America or other regions that are more advanced in this area, the agencies were inspired to try to not replicate it, but to adapt the concept and try to design innovative instruments to propose in their countries. And really, it has been an example of knowledge interaction. Because right now, most of the innovation agencies are in the phase of designing or already implementing instruments that were inspired by the training course. So this has been, and it is a success story that I wanted to share with you. And with this, I think that I'm over my 5 minutes. I'm very excited of the discussion.
Thank you, Matteo. You recognized me unmuting to give you a little bit of a warning there. Thank you for keeping to time. And last but not least, I will give the floor to Kirsten Dunlop, CEO of EIT Climate-KIC, to give us a little bit of insight in terms of building capacities for innovation and thought leadership. Kirsten, are you happy to take over here?
Thank you very much, Sarah, and thank you, Catalyst 2030, above all, for the opportunity to join this wonderful conversation. So again, maybe a little bit of an explanation of where I'm speaking from. EIT Climate-KIC is a European originating organization working all over the world with a very strong focus on place-based transformation, and place is then a catalyst for value chain transformation as well, kind of weaving in and out of places and contexts. Our core concern is systemic change at the scale and speed that the climate emergency requires. But we are very conscious as an organization that when we talk about, we spend a lot of time talking about climate and talking about nature and talking about the planet. But actually, when it comes down to it, the challenge is that we really care about ourselves. It's people that we really need to transform. It is human transformation, social transformation, and we are the problem as well as the solution. So there is a very significant component in here about what does human development, what role does human development and human transformation play as the critical enabler, the critical barrier, the critical enabler, the entire kind of playing dance floor of climate transformation. So we work with cities, hundreds of cities, we work with regions, we work with countries, and we work in all sorts of different contexts in sub-Saharan Africa and South America or in India, where we're engaging with communities, but with multi-actor, so cities, communities, policymakers, governments, decision makers, funders, institutions, individual startups, kind of different forms of social aggregation, social cohesion. So in that context, I think from our perspective, I want to kind of talk about how we make sense of what it means to really seek to influence, enable, and to catalyze change, and to catalyze this kind of multiplying effect through capacity and capability building. And I'm going to make sense of this with 2 axes, if you like, that are not exactly perfectly orthogonal, but at least are intersecting with one another. One is an axis around leadership, and I don't mean by that people with the title of a role leader, but people exercising leadership at all sorts of levels and scales of transformation, where you are effectively acting or playing a role of agency individually and or collectively to pull the future into the present and to seek to change structures, assumptions, practices, habits, to create the space for that to happen, which requires both a stubbornness and a willingness to take risk, to question assumptions, and the mindsets and the capabilities and the skills to hold that, but also requires a fundamental tolerance and acceptance of emergence, that what we don't know. As things emerge, they change. And there are all sorts of discoveries that we're making about things that we simply just haven't anticipated or thought about in trying to make a new world. The other side of this spectrum, of this axis, is the fact that we are facing a climate reality which is dramatically different from what we really are actually fully acknowledging for ourselves. And it's not just a climate reality, it's a reality around nature, around people, around artificial intelligence, decision-making, financial flows, the way in which institutions behave. So there's another end of this perspective, which is around action and resilience in crisis, what it takes from individuals and from communities to engage, to be able to act in a context of crisis, a polycrisis of constant change and emergence, where adaptive capabilities become absolutely essential, and not just the adaptive capabilities of individuals to pivot in a moment or respond or reach for things or to be prepared, but to reach out for one another. So this kind of notion of proactive and responsive capabilities, how do you equip individuals and communities and societies for that? And the other axis I want to put into this is around global north and global south, and what is increasingly a more nuanced, thank goodness, more complex, more complicated set of engagements and dialogues around what those are, what that is as an axis in the world, what those are in terms of spaces of difference. One with an obligation to unlearn a set of norms, of practices, of behaviors, to relearn, and many ways to re-norm. And I was literally just speaking earlier on a whole workshop earlier this afternoon about narratives and shifting the story, the way in which we're telling stories about ourselves. In the global north, we have given ourselves a story about scarcity, when we are living in a world actually of abundance, of extraordinary abundance, and yet our narrative is all about a scarcity and a scarcity mindset that makes it incredibly difficult to take more spacious decisions, to give ourselves the space to unlearn many things and relearn them. And then from the other side of the spectrum on this axis, the notion of really building capacity, even the language of space building, capacity building, capability building, of creating new capabilities, creating new space, of creating abundance in a context of scarcity. So on the one hand, you have people creating scarcity when there is actually abundance, and on the other, the need to create abundance in a context of scarcity. In both cases, the symbiosis lands in a need to learn. And our core experience as an organization working with cities, regions, policymakers, decision makers, people working in institutions, working in community, working with farming communities, or working the land, working in value chains on circular economy, is the need to acknowledge that learning gives us power. It has power laws in it. It has an enormous power to accept that what we're trying to do is essentially uncharted and unprecedented, that we do not have all of the answers. We have many solutions, but we don't have an integrated mechanism for putting everything together, and that we are asking something of ourselves individually and collectively, which has an enormous strain, social, emotional, intellectual, and collective. And that requires us to use the muscles we have to adapt, to look for emergence, to understand, but that requires us to learn. So like acquiring an understanding of a global nervous system and beginning to build out towards a global nervous system of individual and collective capabilities, networked and connected across the world, so that we can be responsive in crisis and at the same time creative and generative exactly in those moments. So for us as an organization, there are two elements or two structural elements that intersect here. And I'm going to use the analogy of Daniel Kahneman's work on thinking fast and thinking slow. We use, for example, a structure like a Climate Leadership Academy to do rapid contextual learning in moments, in context, from experiences, to quickly spiral them up into something that makes sense of an experience, turns it into an action, turns it into a process reflection, and gives a sense of competence or capability for that context. That can be replicated, it can be fractal, it can be amplified out. On the other hand, we use something which is more deep structural learning, like the partnership that we have with the Swedish International Development Agency, the Systems Innovation Learning Partnership, which is about deep, slow structural engagement between communities of practitioners, understanding the systems that they are embedded in and caught within, and paying attention to look at those from a distance, from a perspective, taking perspective on what assumptions are there, what patterns, what institutional habits, so that you can work out what to unlearn and how to unpick yourself from within the system and take that perspective. And those two are constantly intersecting. For us, holding space for both is the essence of what we're talking about in trying to influence policy, both innovation policy and the policy of climate innovation.
And now I'm starting to crowd your space as well, Kirsten, in the same way as I did with Matteo. So I will ask you to maybe leave that at that. I'm curious if I can invite Julie, Matteo, and you, Kirsten, into maybe reflecting before we open up for questions from the audience on each other's first initial inputs here. What I'm taking from the conversation is the hidden areas and areas where we haven't necessarily looked at before, and that in terms of leaning into that, we need to lean into the complexities within the complexities, and it's really around equipping individuals in many multiple different ways. What maybe, Julie, maybe first impressions in relation to the capability and capacity building? What are you hearing from Matteo and Kirsten that has stuck with you here? And while I give you maybe a little second to think about that, anyone who is here in the conversation, feel free to put your questions or comments or thoughts into the chat. Sorry, Julie, can I pivot over to you? Oh, she's unusually still on my screen, but I think I think that she actually had to step out. So Matteo, I think that I'm going to have to pick on you to come in here. I hope that that's okay.
Yeah, sure. I have many comments. I think that both intervention of
I might rudely interrupt you at some point there to make sure that Kirsten gets some time and that we have some time for the audience as well. But
yeah, sure,
ahead.
sure. No, I won't be wrong. I think that I would like to highlight 2 or 3 points. The first one is the importance of capacity building at different levels. So there is a level that is individuals and communities. That is the level that Julie pointed out. There is a level of government that was basically my intervention. There is a level of businesses and NGOs and organizations and civil society that is equally important. So how we think about capacity building in a multi-level concept. So this is the first point. The second point, I really liked, Kristen, the fact to learn. So how it is different going from abundance to scarcity or scarcity to abundance, but how this should really be different in the context of different countries. I'm just back from Honduras, where it was until yesterday, and they are facing really a climate crisis. I mean, the air is not breathable. There are a level of pollution and contamination that was never registered before. And Tegucigalpa was the most contaminated city in the world on Monday because of fires, because it's not raining. So adapting to this new situation is clearly key in this kind of countries. And the third concept, and I will stop here and pass to Kristen, is the thing that I introduced in my presentation, that is trust. I think it's not just knowledge, and knowledge communities and capacity building is also an important way to build trust. And it means trust in the knowledge generated, but also trust in institution, trust in each other. And the transition to circular economy, for example, is impossible without increasing trust. And in Latin America, in the society where I work, often really there is not a situation of trust. So for me, this is a key concept.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that, Matteo. I will pivot over to you, Kirsten, but I can see that Julie has managed to join us again. So
sorry, I got disconnected. Apologize
all
for
good,
that.
all good. This happens. Welcome back into the conversation. But Kirsten, maybe you build a little bit further the bridge between Matteo and Julie. And you're on mute, so we're gonna need.
Oh, okay,
thank
sorry.
you.
So I very much agree with you, Matteo, this notion of multi-level, very contextual, multi-level learning. And I think, as you were saying, indeed, multi-actor. It's like we have got to comprehend that there's learning that is individual, there's learning that's collective, there's a learning in community, and there's also learning in institutions. And I think that's very much what I took from what you were saying. This, and in similar and different ways between you and Julie, the notion of almost what a good friend of ours who leads the International Institute for Environmental Development calls hidden handbrakes, these kind of mechanisms that are embedded in our institutions that make it very, very difficult to overcome their path determinancies. And so you're helping people both learn not just the kind of the consequences of that and what alternatives could look like, creating the conditions for those alternatives to be experimented with. So something like policy labs or regulatory sandboxes or process sandboxes, so you experiment with alternatives, but also create, as you said, the trust, the social infrastructure to experiment and to take the risk to try, because otherwise it is really so hard to act as an individual actor in an institutional sense. And Julie, I was really reflecting on, there's a really strong connection on this notion of, we use a lot of words around circular economy, circularity, and the practical realities of that are often poorly understood and rarely seen. So something as simple as you can't simply get there, or you just simply don't have the resources, is so not on the agenda for so many actors kind of looking at how do they move money, funding, project KPIs. This is the catch-all solution for climate. And at the same time, as you were saying, Matteo, also this notion of how do you go from a theoretical construct to something that is an effective, meaningful difference, because it implies such a difference in value, assumptions about what value is, and how that is transferred and exchanged. So it's an interesting kind of multi-layer, multi-level, multi-actor, unpicking assumptions, looking at the narratives, creating the conditions for something to be tried differently, and then capturing that into an actionable process. Not an easy game.
I can pick it up at the, you're on mute, but I understand. Okay, great. Sorry, I lost you for a second there. No, both very interesting interventions. I think it would be great to have more time to learn a bit more. Reflecting a bit on Matteo, so definitely trust is an issue, and definitely recycling. Like, we have to break this mentality of circularity is recycling. Oh, hey, I put it in the bin, it's in the plastic bin. It's like, no, we need to stop it from like actually getting to our house to go into the bin. How do you kind of change that mindset? I think is really challenging. And I think like we kind of need to come together from the top. So I think you both are mentioning multi-stakeholder. How do you also, how do we ensure that different ministries are creating policies that make sense to each other? So how is the environmental ministry talking with the Ministry of Education? So as we shift to these circular models, how are we ensuring that the curriculum in our schools are actually building into repair skills or vocational skills? Like, how do we even build that pipeline of talent? And then obviously, how do you retrain the talent within private organizations or with companies to be able to meet that demand? So I think on one side, you have kind of these policies need to come together at the top, the stakeholders need to come together. And at the bottom, and like undoing like you're saying, unlearning, how do we ensure the behavior change of people? Because if the policies are there and everything's there, how do we ensure that people are going to do what it is that's been done? So I think this is something that we've seen before, like startups come in and they say, hey, I have this great idea. It's an app. It's going to be like segregation at waste at the doorstep or whatever. Like in India, we've done a project together also with Climate-KIC in Bangalore. And we said like, hey, it's great if you do an app, but if you don't get people to use it, it's not going to be successful. So how are you ensuring that the behavior change is happening? How are you ensuring that you're getting kind of those two elements together? And how are we ensuring that the circular models are just? So it is fair and decent work. Like we're doing a lot of work. We're doing a research report right now for GIZ in Asia around just transition and waste management and circular economy, because there's a big, also when we say circular economy is recycling, there's also a notion that just transition is for like the informal sector, and it's not just the case. So I think there's a lot of preconceived notions that people have that we also need to break down in order to make progress towards that next step, because sometimes people just think, oh, it doesn't affect me because it's just transition, it's the informal sector, it's out there, you know, the informal workforce. Yeah, I make sure that my sourcing is coming ethically, but it's also what's happening in your business and how are you shifting that reality to generate less waste, and how are you then training your staff? So that would be kind of my connection, I think, between the two conversations. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Julie. And as I am hearing all of you speak, then I'm very, very excited about sort of the work that and all of the things that are possible. But I'm also drawn a little bit, and it comes to my mind this great movie title, Everything Everywhere All at Once. And I feel like that is a little bit what we are describing. We're describing that we need to be on governmental level, we need to be at grassroots, we need to work horizontally, we need to work vertically. And I guess my question here is, where do we find the courage and the conviction, and how do we build the capacity? How do we build capability for courage and conviction as we need to tackle this everything everywhere all at once together? So that's a bit of an easy question for you as panelists, right? So maybe if you could give me a little bit of thoughts on this one.
I'm going to jump in on a reflection that just comes immediately to mind, because I feel like it's kind of the thing that stares us in the face. I think one of the realities I find interesting, or I reflect upon in our work, is we often talk about learning, capability, capacity building as if it's additive. Like we have to add it into people's time, add it into people's work. And yet every single experience that we are making every day, if you are working in an institution, if you are making decisions in a city, or if you're in a region, if you're trying to build a startup, if you're working in communities, we are learning constantly. The question is, is there a way of slipstreaming into that experience and that experiential stream, the scaffolding to help us do something with that learning in a way that is more directional, that is more trust building, that is about building some of that social infrastructure for change, that is more explicit, that is more explicitly designed towards connecting with others and working with others and creating this kind of collective intelligence? Because it's not that we don't have time for this or that we would have to mastermind it at every level. It's there. The question is, how do we untap the potential of what is there? And this is where the horribleness of climate change starts to be kind of interesting. That only gets worse. It only gets more intense. It only gets more extreme and more in people's faces. So it's almost, how do we ride that wave into shore, so much so that we are really beginning to think, this is where I get change to happen, because I am starting to understand that it's happening all of the time. But it's speaking very much to the fact that if I look at the work we're doing, one of the most colossal crisis problems we have is a skills gap. We simply do not have the workforce of people make the changes we need at every level. And I'm thinking, so we need to go back to the lessons I learned as a small child growing up in a street that was full of Holocaust survivors, who taught me when I was really little, by all means, go and get a university degree. That's non-negotiable. But also learn a trade. Learn to paint, learn to be someone who fixes things. Like, you must always have these two skills. It's called survival in life. And I'm thinking, we kind of need everybody on the planet to be something and something else.
Matteo, Julie, we want to come in here?
Yes, if I may. I'm an economist by formation, and there is
That's okay. They are welcome.
Yeah, everybody has a problem, but there is a word that we love, that is incentives and alignment of incentives. So I think that at every level with the complexity of this multidimensional, multi-level problem. The key is aligning incentives. So, for example, in terms of enterprises and firms that also needs to have a circular revolution, a circular transition, the secret should be aligning the fact or convincing of giving the knowledge and the instrument to have a private returns from the circular transition. And I'm really, really convinced that there is the space to have a win-win situation where there is not a trade-off between like being climate conscious, environmental conscious, and being good in business. I think that we are going toward a situation where being good with climate means also being good with business because of global value chain insertion and participation and markets that are changing and whatever. So I really think that it is something about aligning incentives. And in terms of skills and jobs, for example, we are working now in terms of trying to identify what are the circular skills needed. And there is a huge and increasing demand from the private sector for those skills. So it is not having circular skills, whatever this means in each sector and in each industry, because we are conscious that this is like a must and a necessity for the world, for the planet, that it is. I'm not taking away this. This is also a moral thing. But it also helps to find employment. So it is not just something moral, but it's also something useful. So I would say, I don't know if it helps, but I think that the solution, or at least part of the solution, goes toward this alignment of incentives.
Julie, maybe before you come in here, I just noticed that there is also a question that has come in from the audience, and I think it would be actually relevant to bring that into the mix if it's okay. I would love to hear your perspectives on this, maybe as a starting point. And the question focuses around that that in terms of just transition, that in terms of design principles for just transition, we put humans in the center, human-centered design, etc., and that there is an increased call from marginalized communities from different directions to think about processes more as relational in terms of ancestry, in terms of nature as a whole, kind of fellow creatures on the earth, etc. I think the question in terms of this, how do we all think about the shift in decentering humans in how we might achieve the just transition? So any thoughts and reflections on that? And maybe I'll start with you in terms of the mindset shift there, Julie, if that's okay.
Decentering, so taking humans out of the...
So as putting humans away from the focus of the just transition, so it is actually more holistically focused in terms of all living beings on the planet. What is your
so the just transition there? Specifically refers to like also to the decent work element. So I think we shouldn't take anybody out of the mix. I think the environment is also encompassing, I think, like the air that we breathe, the animals that live, it's like, to me, it's everything, it's all encompassing. So I don't think that taking people out of the mix is necessarily the way to do it. I think we need to make holistic approaches that have systemic impact. So instead of doing things, like I mentioned before, instead of saying, hey, the Ministry of Environment does their work on their own, and then the Ministry of Education does their thing on their own, if they're not connected, then we're always going to be kind of working in silos. So I think it's not so much about taking them out, but how do we make sure that everything is integrated in a way so that the impact is positive for everything? And I think we do need incentives to do that. And I think we need incentives around, hey, if we don't do this, or disincentives, if you don't train the workforce, you're going to be in a situation where you're not going to have people that are ready to actually implement those skills. I think there also needs to be incentives around, and I think maybe Kristen mentioned this earlier, sometimes it's more expensive to be circular. Sometimes it's just the cheaper option is that single-use plastic, and that shouldn't be the case. So we need to disincentivize like these, it seems so obvious, but like, shouldn't it be more expensive to use these items that are harmful to the environment? And some countries are already banning them, which is fantastic, but we need to think about the economics, the incentives, like, on the planet level and on the people level, because it's not just, well, yeah, I'd like to do better for the environment, but I economically can't. So I need to go for the options that I can afford. So we need to be like holistic in our approaches to be able to, you know, to accommodate the different needs of like the people and planet. So I think, yeah, I wouldn't leave out one or the other, but I think it's not an easy task, but actions need to be taken, again, like both top down and bottom up.
And this shift of focus in terms of that the focus is essentially across everything, goes back again to this holistic thinking. I am aware of that. I have opened up a big box of conversation, and I am running. The time is running out. I would maybe ask for some grace from the Catalyst 2030 team. I'm going to cheat a little bit and take 2 minutes out and just ask for any final one-liner from each one of you in terms of what is your advice to all of us here as we are really wanting to move into leaning into complexities within complexities and equipping ourselves. Kristen, are you happy to maybe start here?
Well, a one-liner is a challenge, unless that's it. I think I was just thinking about this really, really powerful question of decentering humans. And I think I was just reflecting on the same threads in the conversation we're having, which is understanding it's really about systems thinking. And really, if there's one core capability we need to build, and for all of us, is a capacity to see systems, see ourselves in the systems we're in, and understand that they are constantly acting on us. And so institutionally getting nature into law, as the international human rights movement is actually doing, and as I just discovered this week in Climate-KIC has been written into the music industry, that nature actually has music rights. Getting that into institutions makes the space more plural for humans. It's not just us. And at the same time, at mindsets, you know, there's a renorming. I referred to renorming. We have to unlearn Genesis 1.26, where the notion of dominion over is just it's a self-image, a construct of self that we are going to have to unlearn and relearn some ancient stories around being entirely dependent upon, embedded in. But it's the same thread, you know, act at the institutional, act at the individual, meet in the middle through the collective, and look at the rails that are guiding us, as Matteo says, the incentives and the disincentives, and look at the choices and the choice structuring and the stories that tell us what story is a good story to tell ourselves.
That was a pretty long one-liner, but I'll let you pass on that one. Matteo, anything from your side?
I will try to do a one-liner. I think that our task is to do the right thing, also the easiest option. So basically trying to make easy the decision, and this is possible through knowledge, through capacity building, also through science and technology and missions. That is important.
Wonderful. Julie?
Yeah, I would say, let's not recreate the wheel. When things are working and there's best case practices, let's share them, because it doesn't make sense for everyone to be doing great projects. If we see something works, let's try and get these. I love the community knowledge centers that you were mentioning, Matteo. I'm sure lots of these are going on. Everyone has their communities, but how can we get these to be sharing more of these best practices so that we can adapt locally? Obviously, you can't just copy and paste, but to work from a foundation that's already been worked on for a while, and not to have everyone kind of just trying to address the same problem. Let's learn from each other. And then obviously every reality is different, but let's try and learn, I think, from each other is a good next step as well.
Wonderful. So everything is connected, learn and share accordingly, I think is a key takeaway here. Thank you so much, and thank you for your generosity with staying a couple of more minutes. I would like to just make sure that we are helping the Catalyst 2030 team with the feedback form. So all of you that are here on the call, we would appreciate if you would give some feedback for this session. And thank you so much for your time and for your comments. And have a lovely afternoon or evening or morning, wherever you are.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.